Welcome to Future Trends, where we examine the latest stories reshaping tomorrow's international dynamics. This week's headlines: record conflicts drive peace to historic low. Mexican cartels turned South African farms into meth production hubs. Germany misses UN Security Council seat. Lebanon says Iran should not oppose ceasefire deal. Hezbollah trade attacks, supply chain disruptions back at 2022 levels, and AI vaccine could prevent pandemics. Starting with politics, Armenia PM Pashinyan's ruling party in landslide election victory. The victory is seen as endorsement of the nation's pro-Western shift after threats from Moscow and claims of Russian interference, and sets the stage for a renewed mandate to pursue closer ties with the West. Guinea president's coalition wins legislative majority. Political parties backing Guinea's coup leader turned President Doumbouya have won a majority in the bauxite-rich West African country's legislative elections, tightening his grip on power. The final distribution of Guinea's 147 legislative seats was still being determined, but the pro-Doumbouya Generation for Modernity and Development (GMD) coalition had won at least 100 seats and was strongly outperforming rivals. Kosovo's Kurti set to win vote, but short of majority to end crisis. Prime Minister Kurti's party won the Balkan country's third election in just 18 months, but fell short of the majority needed to end the country's prolonged political crisis. Europe's youngest and one of its poorest nations aspires to join the EU, but has lacked a fully functioning government for much of the past year, as deep divisions in parliament blocked the election of a speaker and a new head of state. Pressure on Merz after Germany misses UN Security Council seat. Austria and Portugal were elected to 2-year terms, along with Trinidad and Tobago and Zimbabwe, in a blow to Merz's struggling government, which has sought to position itself as a leading European voice on the world stage. Portugal took 134 votes and Austria 131, while Germany garnered just 104, significantly below the required 127 votes, despite Berlin's expressed confidence that it would prevail. Hungary to stop issuing worker visas to Filipinos, Georgians and Armenians. Hungary's government called the move a first step towards regulating the inflow of guest workers over what it says are concerns they are pushing down local salaries. Foreign workers account for just 2% of Hungary's workforce based on official statistics, but some sectors, like services and manufacturing, are heavily reliant on foreign workers. Moving to stories in conflict, record conflicts drive peace to historic low as AI warfare surges. The 2026 Global Peace Index reveals a world struggling with the economic consequences of a record-high number of conflicts that are increasingly interconnected and difficult to resolve. This deterioration is driven by a profound geopolitical shift, characterized by the rising influence of middle powers and the waning strength of traditional powers. A rapid technological revolution in warfare is leaving international law and diplomacy far behind, with machines making life-and-death combat decisions faster than any human can review them. Lebanon says Iran should not oppose ceasefire deal. Lebanon's president and prime minister criticized Iran for opposing the latest ceasefire deal between the Lebanese government and Israel, saying their country should not be used by Tehran as a bargaining chip in talks with the US. Despite the truce, there were continued Israeli attacks on the south, while Iran-backed Hezbollah said it targeted Israeli troops with drones and rockets. Taiwan Coast Guard confronts Chinese ships in restricted waters. Taiwan's Coast Guard said that its ships had expelled 4 Chinese government ships that entered restricted waters off the island's south after the two sides broadcast warnings to each other in an escalation of tensions. China has been angered by Japan and the Philippines, saying last month they would begin formal talks on delimiting their maritime boundary, as Taiwan reported a rise in Chinese Coast Guard activity, including standoffs around the Taiwan-controlled Pratas Islands at the top end of the South China Sea. French NATO jet shoots down drone over Latvia as another explodes in Moldova. A drone that entered NATO member Latvia's airspace from Russia was shot down by a French military fighter jet, as fragments of another drone were found in a field in Moldova after it entered from Ukraine earlier the same day. Military drones straying into the airspace of Russia's neighbours have stoked concerns that the war in Ukraine is spilling over NATO's borders. Russia criticises Serbia NATO military drills. Serbia's annual Platinum Wolf exercise began on June 1st with the support of the US European Command and includes 8 NATO members. While Serbia presents the joint military exercise as a tactical and peacekeeping-oriented drill, Russia said the exercises represent an attempt to subjugate Serbia to NATO's will. Now for the latest economics news. Supply chain disruptions back at 2022 levels. After peaking in early 2022 due to COVID-19, supply chain pressures eased significantly in early 2023, but have gradually intensified, climbing steadily throughout 2024 and 2025, before surging again in early 2026 amid ongoing geopolitical tensions, including disruptions to key shipping routes and elevated risks in regions such as the Red Sea, as well as persistent bottlenecks and higher transport costs. Turkey targets more defense sales as West rearms, alliances shift. 2 decades of state investment have transformed Turkey into a major exporter of drones and other military equipment, and the NATO member is now looking to build on that momentum as the West rearms and security alliances are reshaped. Turkey, once heavily reliant on foreign arms makers, now supplies nearly 40 countries mainly in the Gulf, Africa, Asia and parts of Europe, with weapons that many buyers see as cheaper, faster to deliver, and more adaptable than alternatives. Global airlines cut 2026 profit forecast on fuel shock from Iran war. The global airline industry nearly halved its 2026 profit forecast, citing conflict in the Middle East that has driven up fuel costs, disrupted key air corridors, and exposed the fragility of a sector operating on thin margins. The industry expects to post a combined net profit of $23 billion in 2026, well below a previous projection of about $41 billion and down from $45 billion in 2025. Israel's weapons exports reach a record high. Israeli weapons exports reached a record high of more than $19 billion last year, a 30% increase from 2024. Despite criticism of Israel's conduct in its wars in Gaza and with Hezbollah in Lebanon, countries that have vowed to shun Israeli weapons makers are quietly placing orders, according to industry officials, as governments look to Israel because its weapons are battle-tested and they're able to see in real time that the munitions and systems work. India cruise missile deal with Vietnam. The BrahMos missile was jointly developed by India and Russia, and is seen within India as a promising start to an anticipated wave of defense exports in Southeast Asia. India will supply $629 million in supersonic BrahMos cruise missiles, training, and sustainment to Vietnam, with Indonesia targeted for a similar deal. The Philippines was the first foreign buyer of the BrahMos missile system from India, signing a deal worth $375 million in 2022. Turning to development. Germany and France drop joint fighter jet project. The leaders of Germany and France have agreed to scrap a landmark project to develop and build a new generation fighter jet, amid industrial rivalries over Europe's most ambitious defense program. German Chancellor Merz and French President Macron discussed the troubled project on the sidelines of the EU Western Balkan Summit in Montenegro, and concluded that there was no prospect of breaking months of deadlock between arms firms involved in the plan. Mexican cartels turned South African farms into meth production hubs. Raids on South African farms have uncovered meth labs linked to Mexican networks, signaling a new cartel phase. Police uncovered a large methamphetamine laboratory worth about $60 million on a remote farm in Northwest Province, one of 4 major meth sites linked to Mexican criminals uncovered in 2 years. US blacklists some of China's biggest tech firms. The entrants to the blacklist of firms accused of aiding Beijing's military include tech giants Alibaba and Baidu, EV leader BYD, a leading robot maker, and a top biotech firm. While the list doesn't automatically trigger sanctions, it complicates companies' ability to work with the US government and creates reputational risk. Ebola outbreak could exceed 20,000 cases, CDC warns. A growing Ebola outbreak in Central Africa could surpass 20,000 cases within months if efforts to isolate infected people fail, according to new US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention projections. Experts warn the spread of a rare virus strain and ongoing conflict could fuel a major health crisis. Millions pushed into hunger by Iran war. The World Food Programme said an analysis in 3 vulnerable countries found that an additional 2.5 million people in Somalia, 2.3 million in Afghanistan, and 1.3 million in Sri Lanka are struggling to meet their basic food needs. The WFP predicted that 45 million people could be pushed into food insecurity by the end of June, on top of the 318 million people around the world who are already food insecure. Finally, our social news. Genome study shows what made the extinct Ice Age cave lion unique. The cave lion was one of the biggest cats to ever live, prowling a huge swathe of territory from Western Europe across Siberia and into North America, and hunting large prey, and perhaps even people, before going extinct around the end of the Ice Age. An apex predator, significantly larger than the modern lion, cave lions, like the rest of the megafauna at the end of the Pleistocene, were under a huge amount of pressure due to rapid changes in climate combined with increasing human population densities. First vaccine designed by artificial intelligence could prevent pandemics. Researchers say it is the first time a vaccine's key component has been designed entirely by AI and then trialed in people. The vaccine was engineered to work on all coronaviruses, which would include all COVID variants, as well as viruses that currently infect animals, yet have the potential to start the next pandemic. The work is still in the early stages, but the team is already developing separate vaccines that could tackle flu and Ebola. Anthropic urges global freeze on AI as it warns of losing control. The world's most valuable artificial intelligence company has called for a global freeze on the development of the most powerful AI systems, warning that humanity is approaching a point where it could lose control of the technology it is racing to build. The San Francisco company behind the Claude chatbot said it would be willing to suspend work on more capable systems if it could be confident that its rivals would do the same. Early research suggests a path to predict and prevent lung cancer. A team of more than 80 researchers working across 4 continents have identified a set of proteins in the blood that accurately predict lung cancers more than 5 years before diagnosis. The scientists also found early evidence that an existing anti-inflammatory drug could significantly reduce lung cancer risk in people with elevated concentrations of these proteins, which they linked to inflammation. Malaria cases rising in South Africa, Namibia, and Mozambique. The disease that kills more than 250,000 people annually and is surging in southern Africa as the climate shifts. The upsurge jeopardizes South Africa's goal of eliminating the disease by 2029. Experts say climate change is supercharging existing hotspots and lengthening transmission windows, fueling far more intense outbreaks. Namibia reported 8,760 cases in the first 4 weeks of 2026, a 68% increase from a year earlier. Flood-hit Mozambique recorded more than 1.35 million cases in the first 6 weeks of the year, up 55% alongside dozens of deaths. That's your Future Trends update for this week. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time with more stories reshaping our world.